A promise beneath the starlit sky. The night draped over the small coastal town like a soft, endless veil. The distant horizon faded into the deep blue of the sky, where the first hints of starlight began to glimmer. A cool breeze rolled in from the ocean, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and damp earth, blending seamlessly with the quiet rhythm of waves meeting the shore. The cobblestone streets, still damp from the lingering traces of the day's tide, reflected the golden glow of the old-fashioned street lamps. Their flickering light cast elongated shadows that wavered with each passing gust of wind, painting a scene that felt both familiar and distant. Aaliyah walked along the narrow street, her footsteps soft against the uneven stones. There was a quiet rhythm to her pace, slow and unhurried, as if each step pulled her deeper into the past. She had not planned to come back here. Not really. It was supposed to be nothing more than a brief stop in her journey, a place to rest before she moved on. And yet, the moment her feet touched these streets, she found herself slowing down, as if drawn into the embrace of old memories she had long left behind. The storefronts that lined the road remained much the same. The wooden signs, slightly weathered by the years, still bore the names she once knew by heart. A small souvenir shop sat nestled between a bakery and a cafe, its glass window reflecting the warm glow of lantern light. Inside, delicate seashell ornaments and hand-carved wooden postcards were carefully arranged on the shelves, just as they had been when she was a child. She paused for a moment, her gaze lingering on a collection of small seashells displayed near the window. She had once spent hours in front of this very shop, choosing the ones she found most unique, dreaming of where they might have come from, what distant shores they had once touched. A faint smile ghosted across her lips, but it faded as she exhaled softly, stepping away from the window and continuing toward the docks. The pier stretched before her, bathed in the cool silver glow of moonlight. The wooden beams, worn smooth by time and tide, creaked faintly beneath the weight of the night breeze. Out on the water, the ocean shimmered under the soft glow of the lighthouse, its beam cutting through the darkness in slow, rhythmic sweeps. Aaliyah approached the railing, her fingers brushing against the rough grain of the wood. The texture was familiar, solid, unchanging. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the scent of the sea fill her lungs. This place had not changed. This was where she had spent countless evenings, watching the tides rise and fall, tracing the constellations above with the tip of her finger. It was where she and Noah had once shared their dreams of leaving, of seeing what lay beyond the horizon. But tonight, the pier was empty. Only the wind and the waves kept her company.
I thought you'd never come back.
A voice, deep and familiar, carried through the cool night air. Aaliyah turned, her heart stuttering for the briefest of moments before her gaze landed on him. Noah stood a short distance away, his figure illuminated by the golden glow of the lamplight. In his hands, he held a cup of hot cocoa, steam curling into the night air. He hadn't changed much. A few years had carved subtle lines into the corners of his eyes, had added a quiet weight to his expression. But his gaze, steady, clear, was the same as she remembered.
I didn't expect to run into you here.
Noah stepped closer, extending the cup toward her.
It gets cold at night. You should have something warm.
She hesitated for only a second before reaching out, her fingers brushing against his as she took the cup. The warmth seeped through the paper, a stark contrast against the cool air surrounding them. Elia lowered her gaze, watching the faint swirls of steam rise from the drink. The scent of cocoa was familiar, comforting, in a way she hadn't expected.
This town, it hasn't changed at all.
The town hasn't, but we have.
His voice was steady, carrying a weight that settled between them like an unspoken truth. Elia exhaled softly, tilting her head back to look at the sky. Above them, the first stars of the evening flickered into view, scattered across the sky like tiny beacons in the darkness. She had spent so many nights staring at this very same sky, counting the stars, tracing imaginary paths between them, believing that one day she would follow them somewhere far away.
Do you remember our secret spot?
She followed his gaze toward the distant stretch of sand, where jagged rock formations jutted out against the tide. The hidden cove. The place where they had once sought refuge from the world, where they had whispered dreams and promises into the night.
Let's go see it.
Noah didn't hesitate. He simply nodded, as if he had been waiting for her to say those words all along. Together they turned toward the beach, their footsteps slow and measured against the soft sand. The wind carried the rhythmic crash of the waves toward them, blending with the rustling of the distant palm trees. The lighthouse's beam continued its slow, steady rotations, casting fleeting shadows across the landscape. Their silhouettes stretched along the shore, side by side, moving in quiet tandem as they walked toward a place that had once meant everything to them. The night stretched wide and endless, the sky a vast canvas speckled with stars. A soft silver glow draped over the quiet beach, casting the sand in muted tones of blue and white. The tide moved in a steady rhythm, waves rolling onto the shore before slipping away like whispers lost to the wind. Elia walked slowly, her footsteps pressing lightly into the cool, fine sand. The grains shifted beneath her weight, absorbing her presence as if welcoming her back. The scent of salt and damp earth filled the air, mingling with the distant murmur of rustling palm leaves. Ahead, the silhouette of the rock formations stood against the backdrop of the sea. They had always been there, unmoving, unchanged, silent witnesses to the passage of time. She remembered how she and Noah would sit atop them, watching the stars and dreaming of the future. The sky stretched vast above her, each star a distant ember glowing softly in the dark expanse. She tilted her head, letting her gaze wander over constellations she once traced with her fingertips, following paths that led nowhere and everywhere all at once.
This place hasn't changed.
His voice came from behind her, blending seamlessly with the hush of the ocean. Elia didn't turn right away. Instead, she let the words settle, breathing in the familiar air of their shared memories. Noah stepped beside her, hands tucked into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the rolling waves. His presence was steady, like the tide, unrushed, unshaken.
Do you remember how we used to spend nights like this?
Of course I do.
He glanced toward the distant rocks, a faint smile playing at the edges of his lips. Elia followed his gaze, and in that moment, the past unfolded before her. She could almost see their younger selves stretched out atop the rocks, pointing at the stars, weaving stories from scattered lights in the sky. She remembered the way they used to skim stones across the water's surface, counting how many times they would bounce before sinking beneath the waves.
We really thought we'd leave one day.
We believed anything was possible back then.
The wind shifted slightly, carrying away the silence between them. Elia lowered herself to a crouch, letting her fingers skim over the sand before picking up a small, smooth stone. It was cool against her skin, its edges softened by years of tumbling through the tide.
Do you remember the promise we made here?
Elia didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled her arm back slightly before flicking the stone toward the water. It danced across the surface once, twice, then disappeared into the depths. Of course she remembered. They had sat here side by side, whispering dreams into the wind. They had sworn that one day they would leave this town together, that they would explore the world beyond the horizon. They had believed, with all the certainty of youth, that nothing could stop them. But life had unraveled differently.
Some things didn't turn out the way we expected.
Noah exhaled softly, his breath almost lost to the sound of the waves.
But we both ended up back here.
Elia stilled, turning to look at him. His expression was calm, unreadable, yet there was something beneath it, something quiet and unresolved.
Do you regret it?
Noah didn't hesitate.
No.
He shook his head slightly, his gaze lifting back to the sky. The stars reflected in his eyes, distant yet steady, like echoes of something long past but never truly gone. Elia didn't press further. She simply turned her attention back to the sea, listening to the tide's gentle rise and fall. The ocean carried their silence, cradling it between waves and moonlight. This beach, this night, these stars, they had been the backdrop of so many yesterdays. And now, perhaps, they would become the beginning of something new. The night had deepened, its darkness stretching infinitely across the sky. Above, stars shimmered like scattered diamonds, their delicate glow reflected upon the ocean's gently shifting surface. The waves continued their steady rhythm, rolling toward the shore before retreating, whispering secrets only the sea could understand. Elia sat quietly atop a large rock, her gaze drifting over the moonlit shoreline. The beach was bathed in silver light, soft and muted beneath the vast sky. In the distance, the lighthouse stood unwavering, its slow-turning beams sweeping across the horizon, casting momentary glimmers upon the restless sea. A gentle breeze stirred, cool against her skin, carrying the familiar scent of salt and distant tides. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, grounding her in the moment. This place, this night, it all felt like a reflection of another time, a memory she had long held on to but never truly returned to. Noah stood beside her, hands tucked loosely into his pockets. He was quiet, his presence blending seamlessly with the stillness of the night.
If we had left back then, do you think we'd be different now?
Noah was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon.
Maybe we would have found each other somewhere else. Or maybe we would have become strangers.
Elia traced her fingers over the rough, cool surface of the rock beneath her, feeling its solidity beneath her touch.
You never thought about leaving?
A small smile played at the corner of Noah's lips, though his gaze remained on the waves.
I did, but I never actually went through with it. I always thought one day you'd come back.
Elia stilled, something in her heart shifting at his words. She turned her head slightly, watching him beneath the starlight. His expression was calm, steady, just as it had always been. The waves continued their endless motion, lapping gently against the shore. The world here had remained unchanged, yet she knew deep down that they were no longer the same as before.
When I left, I thought I was ready to embrace the world, but some nights I still found myself thinking about this place.
Noah didn't respond right away. He simply glanced at her, his eyes holding a quiet understanding.
This place holds too many of our memories.
He crouched down, picking up a small seashell from the sand. It was smooth, its edges softened by time and tide. He held it for a moment before placing it gently in Aaliyah's palm.
But memories shouldn't become a cage.
Aaliyah looked down at the seashell resting in her hand. It was light, fragile, yet enduring. She closed her fingers around it, feeling its familiar texture. The past had shaped her, just as the waves had shaped this shell, but it did not have to define her.
If we made a new promise now, would you keep it?
She lifted her gaze, meeting his. The reflection of the stars shimmered in his eyes, mirroring the vastness of the night sky, bridging the gap between what had been and what could be.
This time it won't just be words.
A quiet tremor passed through Elia's chest. She tightened her grip on the seashell, letting the wind carry away the last remnants of hesitation.
This time, will you go with me?
Noah held her gaze for a moment before a small, knowing smile formed on his lips.
I'm not just seeing you off, I'm going with you.
Aaliyah exhaled softly, a smile of her own breaking through. In the distance, the waves continued their gentle rhythm, caressing the shoreline in an eternal embrace. Their shadows stretched over the sand, blending into the night, two figures standing side by side beneath a sky full of stars. This time, they weren't just looking at the horizon. This time, they would take the first step forward, together.